Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Before I get started, I wanted to show you exactly what you will need if you want to make the quilt I am making. You'll need about a yard of black fabric cut into 2.5 by 13.5 inch pieces. You'll need 40 pieces. You'll need 128 background squares that measure 5 inches by 5 inches. To make the stars, you'll need 48 pieces of 5 inch by 5 inch print squares. To make cornerstones, you'll need about 25 pieces of 2.5 by 2.5 inch squares. To make those, I cut up 2 identical extra 10-inch squares. Here is a look at the charm pack I used. It's so pretty. I really love it. I'm excited about making some stars with this charm pack. I'm using Kona white for my background, and I'm using Kona black. Those are both from my stash. The white came from a really good deal I got on a cut of 108 width fabric in Kona white, and the black was, I think it was a bolt of Kona black that I got on a really good sale. Talking about the cost of pre-cuts here, I do buy pre-cuts when I get them on a good sale. And sometimes I just get them because they're pretty. But for white and black, really I try hard not to buy those in pre-cut. It's just too cost ineffective. For example, here I'm cutting my 5-inch background squares out of a 108 width. I only had about a yard of the 108 width. And I believe the cost of that to me was probably about $10. I think I got a 3-yard cut of this 108 Kona white for maybe $30. It's been a while. But so $10, I'm going to get everything I need, 128 5-inch squares. If I had purchased 128 5-inch pre-cuts, that would be 4 charm packs plus, you'd have to get a 5th because 42 times 4, well, I guess it would be 4 charm packs, 128. 42, 42, 42, 42. No, that's 168. Okay, so 4 charm packs would be enough. I love math. But even so, 4 charm packs would cost you at least $10 each. So you're talking about $40 to buy them pre-cut versus the $10 I spent on this sale fabric, 1 yard of a 108. You can cut down yardage any way you like to cut down yardage. For something like this, I am using my Scrapbuster XL ruler. What I have to do is fold the fabric over so that the top fold and the bottom fold are parallel so I don't get bowing in the strips. Then I can cut those 5-inch strips or whatever width I want to cut. Once I've got the 5-inch strips cut, then I can lay those horizontally, line those up on my ruler to make sure they're nice and straight. Then I can use that XL ruler again to cut them into the 5-inch squares. Well, it took me quite a bit of time to cut out 128 of those 5-inch squares, but I did get it done. Next, I took my black fabric, which is just regular width fabric, about 44 inches. I went ahead and pressed those creases out. And again, you can cut your strips any way you like to cut your fabric. I'm using this Scrapbuster XL ruler to cut those 2.5-inch strips out of about a yard of black fabric. With all that prep work done, we can now turn our attention to this star of the star, which is this charm pack. I'm going to make a star quilt with 16 star blocks. I'm going to need 3 print fabrics for each star, and that's going to mean 48 5-inch squares. You can plan your star any way you want to. You can have it all scrappy or all one color. You could use solids or prints for your stars. In my case, I like this charm pack. I want to make all my star legs be the same fabric, so I'm going to go through and pick out 2 matching squares for each star. Since I have 16 stars to make, I'll need 32 prints for the star legs. So I'm going to set aside 32 in groups of 2. That left me 10 prints, and then I went through my stash and added 6 more. To cut my star legs, I took the 32 5-inch squares I set aside and cut them all in half diagonally one way and in half diagonally the opposite way. Once I had my stacks of 8 star legs for each star, I went through the 16 5-inch squares that I had left and matched those up with star legs that I thought would look cute together. Well, I've got my little cheat sheet here, and I'm ready to sit down at the sewing machine and start some chain piecing. Before I get started chain piecing, I wanted to show you how I make one of the star leg blocks. I'm going to take one background square. First, I'm going to add a triangle onto one corner, and I'm going to snowball that. I am making sure my little ends overlap at least 1/4 of an inch. They probably overlap here a little bit more. I like to have a little wiggle room. I stitched that triangle on right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam. I'll be doing this a little more efficiently when I'm chain piecing, but for this first sample here, I'm going to go ahead and trim off that white behind my print snowball. I placed a second print square right sides together in the same way on the same side as my background square, overlapping at least 1/4 of an inch, and in my case a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch. I like to have a little extra wiggle room. I'll go ahead and cut off that white triangle underneath here just so you can kind of get an idea of how this is going to look, and I'll be trimming up that block a little bit later. Each of my star blocks is going to need 4 of these snowball squares. It's time to start chain piecing here. I'm going to chain piece 4 triangles onto 4 background blocks. Then I'm going to flip over the other 4 triangles and that center of the star piece that I'm going to be using and set those aside. When I get to the end of this chain, it's time to separate it and go ahead and press those triangles open. I try to assembly line press as much as I can as well. Anything that saves me a little bit of time is something I'm going to keep going back to. With star leg part 1 pressed, it's time to trim star leg part 1. The first thing I'm going to do is trim off the excess print fabric using the white background square as my guide, and then I'll be cutting away that white piece underneath. I have a little scrap bag on my pegboard just for little triangle scraps, and that is where all these cutoffs will go. The trimming does take quite a bit of time. We're going to skip ahead here. I've just got a little bit of waste. Since I kept everything in order, all I have to do is flip over that stack that I turned upside down, and I've got my next few triangles ready to go. I'm going to add a second triangle, right sides together. Make sure it's on the same side as the first star leg. Doesn't matter if it's the left side or the right side. I'm going to continue to keep those center of my star print squares in order as I go through these star legs. Once I get through the entire stack, I'm going to go ahead and press those star legs open, and I'm going to flip them over and trim just the same way I did with the first star leg. Once I had the triangles all put away, it was time to lay out my blocks for chain piecing. I've got the center print 5-inch square, I've got the 4 star leg units, and then 4 background squares for the 4 corners. With everything laid out, I'm ready to chain piece my star blocks. I'll start with the units on the left side of the block first, and then I'll be adding that 3rd unit to each row of this block. First, I grab the top left unit and the middle top unit, the top of the star leg for this particular block, and I'm just going to stitch those right sides together and chain piece this whole stack. When those little stacks were done, I grabbed the middle left and the middle center and started chaining those as well. And then I went to the bottom left and the bottom middle and chained those as well. I separated the chain, put those stacks right back where I got them from, and started adding that 3rd unit to each row. Now that those chains are all separated and put back in order, it's time to put the 3 rows together to complete the block. First, I'm going to put row 1 and row 2 of this block together. I'm nesting the seams between the little units, which means one seam goes one way, one seam goes the other way. I put a little clip in that to hold it in place till I get to the sewing machine. One thing I like to do as a time saver is go ahead and clip on the 3rd row too, and then I'll be able to just sit down at the sewing machine and stitch all the seams at once. Once I had all 16 of the star blocks clipped, I took my time here with this first block, and first I stitched down one seam. Then I flipped it around and went ahead and stitched the opposite seam to complete the first block. Usually on blocks like this, I would go ahead and stitch one block at a time. However, I'm thinking it was late at this time of day. I decided to go ahead and chain piece seam 1 first for all the remaining 15 blocks. Then I broke that chain and I went ahead and stitched the second seam for the 15 remaining blocks. Next, it was time to press my blocks. I really don't have a rhyme or reason as to how I press my blocks. On a 9 patch, I like to fold them away from the center square. That's generally the way I do it. I'll put a row together, actually 3 rows together, and then the top row I'll press away from the center, and the bottom row I'll press away from the center. Depending on the type of 9 patch, sometimes I will press each row one way, with the center row going the opposite way so the seams nest better, but on this star block it really didn't seem to matter. A star block like this is so fast and easy to make. The one thing I love about it is there's nothing around the outside that really has to match up with anything else. What I do want to do is get a square block. That's important to me. I want my block to be square. What I want to do is find some landmarks on my ruler to line up the seam lines in the middle of the block. That center square is what I'm most worried about. I'm using a very large ruler here, but you can also use the lines on your cutting mat. I am lining up the seam lines on my center square at 4.5 and 9 inches. I know that that center block should be 4.5 inches, so as long as I line up the center lines, the center seams, with the 9-inch and the 4.5-inch line on my ruler, and they can be a smidge off, that's okay, but as long as they're close, this is going to turn out great. And I ended up trimming my blocks down to 13.5 inches. Now that I know that I've trimmed my blocks to 13.5 inches, I'm going to take the time to go ahead and cut all these black 2.5-inch strips into 13.5-inch lengths. Next, I needed to find some fabric to cut 2.5-inch squares from. I wanted something that would fit in with the colors of the charm pack. I ended up with these 2 squares of aqua and cut each of these 10-inch layer cake square leftovers into 2.5-inch squares. Next, I spent some time studying my cheat sheet here, and you can see I've got the 16 blocks, the main star blocks, identified. I've got little lines between all those 16 blocks to indicate the black sashing, and the little round dots, those are my cornerstones. Essentially what we have here is a 9-row quilt. We have 4 rows that are nice and wide and 5 rows that are skinny. Feel free to take a little screenshot of my cheat sheet. I hope it's helpful. You'll see I have that cheat sheet stuck on my sewing machine, and I'm referring back to that as I put these rows together. Once I had all the sashing rows and the regular block rows put together according to my little map, it was time to join 2 rows together. I started by clipping a sashing row together with a star block row. I'm nesting the seams where they come together and clipping those in place. And one of my rows will get the sashing clipped onto both sides. Once we get that completed, we can start clipping star block rows together with other star block rows that already have the sashing in between. Once all the rows were stitched together, I did take the time to press all the sashing rows nice and flat. The last thing I did was go around the entire outside of the quilt with a basting stitch to make sure none of my seams would come undone while it was waiting to be quilted. Here we are at the quilt reveal, and you can see this quilt is so simple but so dramatic. Leave me a note in the comments if you think this is something you'll make, and what colors will you use? Would you use maybe a darker background and lighter stars, or no sashing? If you're enjoying my channel, I invite you to subscribe, like the video, and definitely leave a comment. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.